and other places. And they're just right? The scientists were right. And we have to be better prepared because we're not now. And we have to help our local governments, our community partners to be prepared too. And that's what we're here to share with you today, some of the tools that we have made and will continue making available to our local partners. But more importantly, or just as important rather, to communicate with you all about the serious risks that we all face from an economic point of view, with the lack of preparedness, and what we can do together moving forward. Right? But just some baseline points of information. Right? We see Ida come through, which again, the remnants of a tropical depression, and in effect, a really bad thunderstorm. Right? A really bad thunderstorm took out entire communities and cost us lives. And it's a reminder to us here at DEP of the importance of our resilience work. Right? We kickstarted the state's first ever climate resilience strategy that we put out in draft on Earth Day. We've taken public comment on that. We'll be prepared to issue the final version of that inaugural document in the coming days or week. And at the same time, I think many know that we're working on a regulatory reform initiative that we've had in the works for the last year and a half or more, rather, as ordered by the governor, our New Jersey Pact, or New Jersey Protecting Against Climate Threats regulatory reform. We've launched a new green infrastructure rule. We've made stormwater utilities possible and issued guidance for that. All of these things are parts of how we build resilience, right? From planning to infrastructure to engineering with nature in addition to, or sometimes in lieu of, hard infrastructure. Investments in that we make in those things now, they're gonna pay dividends for us later, unquestionably. How do we create more places for the water to go? Because the truth is that climate risks, they don't discriminate, right? There is, again, one bad piece of information, one scary report after another that we're greeted with. And we have to prepare now, from our urban communities to our coastal communities, our inland and fluvial flood risk areas, places that you may not even associate intuitively with climate risk. So often folks can think of climate resilience as a sure thing. It's got to be a sure thing for all of us. We surely all have to prepare, but it is not just about the coast of New Jersey by any stretch of the imagination. And Ida made that all the more clear, right? And focusing on climate resilience, building up, building back. It's just good business. It's good asset management, right? JP Morgan Chase, HSBC, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Citigroup, UBS, Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, all of them, right? The list could go on and on. They've all issued climate guidance, right? We've seen Moody's, we've seen S&P begin integrating climate vulnerability into municipal credit ratings. We've seen large insurance firms taking notice, the financial regulators taking notice under this administration, the Federal Reserve, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Housing Finance Agency. They're all warning of risk the risk that climate change poses to our financial markets, to municipal debt, to sovereign debt. And every one of these organizations may not all agree on the severity of climate change. They may not agree on the exact local impacts, but they're all taking climate seriously. And none are assuming a best case scenario. Our scenario is moderate at best, right? Increases in chronic inundation, increases in sea level rise. And we understand at DEP that our job, our mandate is to protect our residents and our communities and their businesses from the vulnerability to the impacts of climate change, right? By providing wise planning support. And in the wake of Ida, so many folks have approached DEP and me personally, with questions and about the shock of confronting an event like Ida. I couldn't tell you how many times I've heard the narrative that goes something like this. The itsy bitsy brook has been behind my house for 30 years and it never flooded. What's happening? What do we do? We have to plan for the itsy bitsy brook not to be so itsy bitsy, because our flood hazard areas are greater than we currently recognize them to be. And that became all the more clear when Ida hit us on September 1st. And if we miss or neglect the opportunity that is before us to build better resilience into our communities through sound planning, through incentives for the most vulnerable residents, through DEP's Blue Acres program, with respect to relocating to safer areas so that we can create more flood storage where the flood waters are now and will continue to become located. We have to acknowledge that there is this upfront cost of resilience, but the return on that investment, it's undeniable, right? For every $1 we invest in resilience, we will save $6 in recovery. And look, that's where we've been stuck as a society, this cycle of storm damage, loss of property, loss of life, recovery, repeat. And we can't stay in that cycle. We have to build back better in those places where we should build back at all. And we have to plan to give the water someplace to go. And beyond just chronic inundation, right? We need to plan and be prepared for the taxing of our healthcare system from heat-borne illnesses. We need to make sure that we're taking account for the risk to our infrastructure, both with respect to the state assets as well as private assets. We have to think about the way that, for example, even minor sunny day flooding, right? Not flooding in the event of a large storm. How even that minor sunny day flooding can keep customers away from businesses, how it can interrupt supply chains, how excessive heat can keep customers indoors, how it can increase the expense to municipalities that need to establish cooling centers, how it can lower worker productivity. But I think the good news that and there is good news, right? We don't have to stand here scared of the future. The good news is that climate adaptation is cost effective, whether we're talking about floodproofing or elevating buildings, whether we're talking about planning for increased rainfall and the systems that we could put in place to better manage our stormwater. All of these investments of our time, of our resources, will pay dividends. So what we're going to share with everyone post this session today is a number of tools that we have at DEP that Carrie Kirk-Flew will be sharing with the League, with our local partners as a reminder, right? The Resilient New Jersey Local Planning Toolkit that we had put out in response to the change in the municipal land use law. The suite of NJ Adapt tools, including New Jersey Flood Mapper, that can help you understand and to take account for risk. Our sea level rise guidance that can help municipalities in their decision making. Our My Coast portal that can help folks to aggregate the information about flood events, and many, many other opportunities that we have to build connectivity and work together. Because the truth is, that's the only way we're going to do this. The only way that we are going to confront the risk that we all face together is by joining hands and supporting one another with our technical expertise and with our compassion, because change is hard and we all have to change together. So I'll leave it there. I know that we have someone too, Mike, from Redfin to speak, and happy to just engage with everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is a topic at the League's virtual conference last year. It was a topic the year before at our session. Will be a topic again at our upcoming session. And appreciate the fact that the department has played an active role in our conference and in educational sessions such as today. So much appreciation to you for joining us today and your staff. Once again, my apologies to everyone for those technical issues that now that you all know how much email I get and the high volume of email I get, I'll pivot towards Dr. Fairweather and thank Dr. Fairweather for joining us. As mentioned before, she is the chief economist at Redfin and previously had been at Amazon, and had done work on the housing crisis back about 12, 13 years ago, and has generously agreed to join us today. And Dr. Fairweather, if you may, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. That was a great presentation. Thanks, Sean Latour. I have to get your name right. Sorry about that. All right, so I'm the chief economist of Redfin. I study the housing market, and I've been paying close attention to the risks that climate change poses to the housing market. The big picture is that we already have a shortage of housing in this country. Freddie Mac estimates that we are short 2.1 million housing units for the entire US, and climate change is going to make that housing shortage worse. Natural disasters will destroy some properties, which will drive up demand for the housing that is resilient, that withstands disasters. And climate change will also make many properties more expensive to maintain. Recently, Redfin added flood and climate change data to our website and our app. We did this so home buyers would have better information about the climate risks that they face when buying a home. But this data can be referenced by anyone, including you all. Redfin has risks for storm, drought, heat, and fire risk from Climate Check. That's at the neighborhood level. And we also have data on flood risk from First Street Foundation down to the property level. So I'm going to do a little demo of the data. So in case you want to look it up, you know how. Let me share my, can I share my screen? So it's disabled.
Mike, I think you need to give permission.
One moment.
Sorry to add the technical difficulties.
That's all right. This one should be easier. Dr. Fairweather, you should be able to share your screen.
Great.
Right.
Awesome. All right, so you should be able to see my screen, Redfin website. I'm going to search for Point Pleasant Beach in New Jersey. When you search for a neighborhood, over at the top right, you can click on See Market Insights. And then there's a tab here for climate. So you can see for Point Pleasant Beach, there are 2,341 homes that are already at risk of flooding. That's 64% of homes. And according to First Street Foundation, within 30 years, 86% of the homes will be at risk. Scrolling down, you can also see different climate risks. Point Pleasant Beach is most at risk for storms with a score of 79 out of 100. mild drought and heat risk and almost no fire risk, which intuitively makes sense. And I can also show you a home. Let's pop over to Trenton, New Jersey. So for this home, go down to flood. If you scroll down to the map area, you can see that this home has a flood factor of 5 out of 10. If I click on the flood factor and zoom out, you can see the flood risk for the whole entire area. As you can see, there's a lot of flood risk along the Delaware River, but there's flood risk throughout the area in places with low elevation. Scrolling down even further, go over to people details, which is the bottom. This home has a flood factor of 5 out of 10, but it's actually not in a FEMA zone. We also have the FEMA zone information here. The flood factor data is more forward-looking, so you can see here how flood risk will rise over time, how currently there really isn't much flood risk, only a 2% risk of flooding this year, but in 20 years, the risk of flood will be about 1 in 3, and then in 30 years, it will be 45%, according to the modeling done by First Street Foundation. So we put this information on the site with the hopes that this would educate home buyers, and when they're weighing the decision of whether to buy one home or another home down the street, they'll at least have a better sense of what the risk will be to them long term. There we go. So what should local governments do to minimize the economic damage from climate change, particularly the economic damage that will be done to properties? One thing to do would be to invest in climate resiliency, as we talked about earlier. And the other option would be to relocate neighborhoods where there just really isn't a path forward in terms of making the neighborhood climate resilient. So how should local governments decide whether to invest in a neighborhood to make it more resilient or to help relocate the residents of the neighborhood? You should look at things like the severity of the climate damage. If it seems like the flood risk is just going to be too much to raise all the homes, then that might be a reason to relocate instead of invest. Look at the cost of investments. How much would it cost to raise all the homes or to do the investments to make flooding less frequent? And also look at the benefits. The benefits of keeping the neighborhood intact might include the economic value of the neighborhood, like if it's a big tourist destination, for example. If there's historical value to the neighborhood, it's a neighborhood that we do want to see kept in place for that reason, and the community value of the neighborhood. You can preserve the community value even with relocation, but you'd have to do it in a way where the entire community is relocated to the same area instead of dispersed across the state or country. What are the risks of not doing enough? When a property is damaged and for whatever reason the owner can't afford to rebuild, the owner may choose to abandon the property. And if this happens, this could lead to neighborhood decay. If we are in a situation where neighborhoods have many foreclosed properties, many abandoned properties, that would drive down property values for the whole entire neighborhood, even for people who choose to stay, who choose to make investments. Because if you have all these boarded up homes, that would lead to neighborhood decay. And another risk is inequality increasing. Low-income households may only be able to afford to live in substandard housing because of the fact that we're already in a housing shortage, and climate change could further reduce the stock of housing, the stock of livable housing. People may have to live in places that consistently get flooded because those are the only properties that are affordable. Whereas wealthy property owners may be able to make investments in resiliency of their homes. They may be able to raise their homes or do investments in their landscaping or band together as a community to make investments in the whole entire neighborhood if it's a wealthy neighborhood. And those investments would actually drive up property values, because in a world where climate change and natural disasters are more frequent, having features in a home that make it more resilient would be more attractive and maybe further out of reach for some lower income residents. So overall, it's a huge economic problem, but I encourage all of you to start thinking about it, to start thinking about these really hard trade-offs between what neighborhoods get investments, what homeowners or property owners get money to make their homes more resilient, and when do we have to cut our losses and think about relocation because the neighborhood can't really feasibly be saved, or the budget just doesn't make sense to save that neighborhood. So that's what I've been thinking about, and thank you for inviting me, because I would love to hear more from you and hear all your questions about our data or about our thinking on the risks of climate change to the housing market.
Thank you, Doctor. Back up. We're going to open it up to questions and discussions. A moment. Mayor Kovach, are you there? I know
I am. Yeah, I'm here.
Weather chased you to the phone, I believe, but I think we have.
Yes.
Right.
So yes, unfortunately, I was driving to an event and thought I would get into the event, except the heavens opened up. So I'm sitting in my car finishing this. But Dr. Fairweather, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your time. And obviously, Commissioner, your insight is extremely helpful. I'm sure there are a ton of questions, but, you know, since I'm the president, I get to ask the first. And actually, I have a couple of different questions. So, you know, we talk about the role of municipalities, especially. So let's start with New Jersey is a home rule state. So in my small community, obviously I can work to do all that I can to create the resiliency within my community. How do I get my neighboring communities to also, one, buy in and understand that what they do has a significant impact? And I'll use the example, you know, we have the Beaver Brook that comes through town, and it rarely flooded until a development was built on an old farm, and all the runoff that used to, you know, be on the farm now comes into this brook, which is not built to take and withstand. You know, obviously every municipality has a right to develop its properties, but how do we work with our partner communities to help them understand how we impact one another? We're all interrelated and interconnected is my first question.
I guess
I don't know, is that Commissioner, is that you?
I guess I'm supposed to answer that, huh, Mayor?
Please.
I think the problem that you identify is the problem that we struggle with at DEP every single day, in ways large and small. And I'll give you just one example. So we get thousands of applications for land use development every year, right? We're not like a DEP is not some sort of master planning or zoning board that will approve every subdivision, but we see a lot of it. And the reason that we see a lot of it is because given the environmental resources protected by our statutes and regulations, it's almost inevitable that we see a need to where a development is proposed where there could be an impact to a wetland or a development in a flood zone that needs review by DEP. And almost invariably, at the first pass, the development application will kind of just be a little, how do you say, not entirely in keeping with the rule. And we will get incoming quite frequently about, oh, DEP, you're being too hard, you're being too strict. And this development is special for all of these reasons. And you got to cut us a little break, right? And the problem is that everybody wants a little break. And that's the history of development in the state of New Jersey, where we've done kind of just barely enough in terms of protecting the wetlands, which provide flood storage, in terms of protecting the riparian areas along streams, all of the trees and vegetation and root systems that help to keep the stream banks healthy, right? We've done just barely enough. Some would say not hardly enough to protect those areas because of this approach. And it's the same thing that I think our municipal partners see. And the only way, to my mind, that we address this is through shared regional planning. And that's hard in a home rule setting because your only option is to develop a coalition of the willing. The regulatory sticks and carrots will only get you so far coming from the DEP. I'll give you one fine example. Stormwater utilities. We created that opportunity by legislation for local governments or an assortment of local governments to come together and create a utility that will help to manage a community or combination of communities' stormwater. There's not one entity or suite of entities that have taken us up on that yet. And in part, it's because it's hard to see the value of the thing. It seems in a way like a luxury. We're going to spend time and money organizing to better manage our stormwater. Some decried that effort as a rain tax.
Yes, I remember that.
And I'll tell you this, Mayor, I think that Ida was one hell of a rain tax.
I don't disagree. And I think here it has been, listen, the last 18, how many months are we in this now? 19 months, 20 months? I can't even remember. It's all kind of blurring. And I think we're all struggling to get through just what we need to get through to keep our doors open and everything, at least. I mean, we moved government from the 19th century to the 21st century in a matter of weeks when we first shut everything down in May or March of last year. And I don't think that there's not a willingness. I think part of it is education and understanding. It is, and yes, there's been a lot of, the rain tax has been around as long as even when I was sitting on Highlands Council back in early 2000s, there was a conversation around rain tax, but maybe if there were a group of mayors, or maybe it's a county that's willing to kind of step up and be a part of it. And we can make that ask through the league. One of my to-dos is a stormwater asset management plan for the town of Clinton. But again, it comes down to cost and the weighing of, it's similar to a family. I've got to, do I pay the bills and put food on the table, or do I put away for a rainy day? So we're all struggling with that financially.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know if there's money available that could help, with a grant program, if we could get a couple of communities together to do a regional asset management plan on stormwater. But I would put that ask out there. And then I guess my other question, and sorry, everyone, if anyone else has them, you can ask after this, but, we talk about the dollar invested saves $6 on the back end. But again, it's finding that dollar to invest. So, I know that you guys are going to put out some of the toolkits, and I think that's going to be a huge help. I think keeping the conversation and just reminding over and over and over again, and we can point to Ida. I look at, Clinton was lucky. We had flooding, but we didn't have the damage that Lambertville had. So we need to figure out how, and I'm expecting you to have the magic wand to just wave it so that I don't have to fix it. The justification and the showing the examples of how this investment really does make a difference. We understand investment in infrastructure because, water lines and sewer lines, public health and safety. It's making the connection for resiliency and public safety as well. So do you have that magic wand? You can just wave it for me, please.
I mean, I thought that we agreed in our retelling of Wicked together that you were going to be the one with the wand.
No, I got no wand. I tried, but I don't have it.
But you know, I think we together are the wand, right? We have to convince our constituents that long-term planning is worth it, that the thing we can't see matters to protect and to invest in and to enhance. Because as I'm sure our local partners here have seen in their own communities, that it's easy to kind of build and forget about stormwater infrastructure, right? It's easy to presume that the stream will carry the water away. And it's hard to focus on this long view when everyone is stretched to make ends meet in their respective communities on the issues of tomorrow. We have to convince our constituents and ourselves that designating a proportion of our resources to invest in long-term propositions benefits us all. And I see that as the biggest struggle, because you'll have constituents invariably that maybe aren't as interested in the long-term proposition because maybe they don't plan to be there, right? And that's, you know, sort of what we see from a regulatory perspective, that, you know, those who are investing and have a very short-term outlook, they may find anathema some of the changes that DEP would propose because it may have an incremental increase, the benefit of which they will not realize. But our local partners and our residents are going to be the beneficiaries of that over the long term. So if we are looking at increases in flood standards that work an incremental cost on the need to, say, elevate or flood-proof, that is going to have a longer term benefit. And we have to help folks appreciate that and not buy into this old, tired, disproven logic, not even logic, this disproven rhetoric that somehow, you know, investments in our natural capital and in our environmental protection prohibit investments in our economic development. Nothing could be further from the truth. They are united.
Right. Okay. Mike, you have a question?
Sure. And actually, I requested a question for Dr. Fairweather, but one comment about the stormwater utilities. I was the lucky soul who worked that bill long before I was executive director. And I think it took about 10 years to get that done. There was a special task force created which made that recommendation, and obviously we ran up against the criticism of the rain tax. So it's a long process, and you see Jim from Princeton commented that Princeton is looking at it. It is a long process. Hopefully it won't take as long as it took to get the bill to the governor's desk, but it is a complicated process, but it is an option for towns. Particularly, I would think CSOs and others. Dr. Fairweather, if I may, that website was really enlightening. And my request would be if you could if that's a public link, if you could put that link in the chat box. But my question really is kind of out of curiosity, having seen that, how would you compare, if you can, how would you compare New Jersey to some other coastal states in terms of climate, you know, what's coming in terms of climate change, preparation, and just overall sort of the, pardon the pun, the lay of the land?
Sure. So New Jersey has very high storm risk, and that's true of the entire East Coast, from Maine all the way down to Florida. As hurricanes and storms become more frequent, every coastal state on the East Coast is going to face that storm risk. And you might think that like maybe Florida would be hardest hit, but even a state like Maine is going to get hit hard because they aren't they don't have a history of dealing with storms the way that a state like Florida has dealt with storms. So even the places that may not have as frequent of disasters could get hit hard economically because they're not as prepared. So really preparation is the key in terms of determining like how high the risk is, and that's something that you all have control over. Heat risk is also high for is also moderate for New Jersey. It's a 37 out of 100. Other states on the East Coast have higher risk. Connecticut actually has really high, or no, Connecticut has it's the same. Delaware has about the same heat risk. Florida has very high heat risk, which shouldn't be that surprising. But it really, to reiterate, it's really about preparation. You can reduce any of this risk with the right infrastructure and the right investments. And there are some investments that aren't as obvious. Things like community resiliency. The more tight-knit a community is, the more able it is to weather a storm. There was a study in Chicago about a heat wave that hit Chicago, and the deaths were larger, even after controlling for things like income and race, in areas that didn't have as close of social ties. Because during a heat wave, people end up getting overheated and end up dying because no one's checking in on them. So I think that should also be part of any climate plan, is thinking of ways to make communities more tight-knit. And to the mayor's point, Mayor Kovach's point, if there's community even across city lines or township lines, then you'll be more likely to work together to come up with solutions. So I think that's something that shouldn't be downplayed. It's very important, the idea that we're all in this together and we have to help each other out. Does that answer your question? Anything else that you want me to touch on?
I guess the natural follow-up to that is, and maybe you don't have an opinion on it, but how do we compare in response? Are we ahead of the curve, behind the curve? Are we right in the middle?
I don't have precise numbers on that, but the fact that you've already had Sandy and now Ida means that you've gotten a preview for what the risks really are. And I think that will make New Jersey better able to respond than states that maybe didn't get as hard hit by Ida, because they don't have it in their face that they need to do something about it right away.
All right, good point. Mayor Kovach, I don't know if you can see it because I know you're on the phone. We do have a question in the box.
Yes, I did see it from Jim in Princeton. So his question, Commissioner, is they're interested in investing in stormwater mitigation, but are a little stymied in that our available open space is green acres encumbered. Using this land requires a diversion and mitigation. Are there any discussions taking place regarding changes in this policy regulation to provide relief?
I was just trying to unmute myself. I think that we're in a situation that demands creative thinking, and that we keep all of our options on the table. And green acres encumbered property is intended to be for recreation and conservation purposes, right? And there has to be policy consideration with respect to what constitutes a conservation purpose. And I think that the mayor's question kind of goes into that territory. There's another point just to follow up on your question earlier, Mayor, that I think Mike Russell from our team could take. Mike, if you're able to unmute yourself and follow up on the point about community choice.
Yeah, I think it's worth considering that, as these tools become more available, tools like Redfin, people will be able to identify the climate risk, and as they're choosing between communities to similar communities, those communities that have stormwater resilience and climate mitigation measures in place, that will become like an amenity to attract people to those communities, and those that don't will be less attractive to potential home buyers, which may also have some additional knock-on effects for property values.
Mike, this is Katie Angarone. If I may also, the department has done a lot of work talking with the insurance and investment industry as well. And what we have heard from some of the folks who are advising the lenders is that they really do want to see and easily accessibly see that local communities are taking climate mitigation seriously because they are absolutely factoring it in when they're deciding whether or not to lend.
So including this as part of our master plans, as we're looking at either our existing communities or potential development, will the toolbox help our boards and our professionals kind of look at it with this new lens?
Yes, unquestionably. Yes.
Okay.
And that's what our municipal resilience toolkit is intended to do, to assist our local partners with that vulnerability assessment and the planning that should follow, unquestionably. But just to put a further finer point on what Mike and Katie were hitting on, yes, folks vote with their feet, right? We should also be mindful, very, very mindful of those less able to vote with their feet, because we will see an expansion of inequities as a function of climate change. And we have to do better in this respect than we have in the equity issues that are not dissimilar in how they have delivered a disproportionate impact in the past, whether we're talking about disproportionate impact in terms of academic availability because folks vote with their feet, or because of environmental externality because folks vote with their feet. We can't leave each other behind.
Agreed. Mike, do we still have questions in the Zoom Zoom box? Listen to me, the chat box.
Yes, someone just came in. Well, the first is, okay, with JEDI, if you see in the box, there's a reference to JEDI, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So
not Star Wars Jedi?
No, that's not Star Wars Jedi.
Okay.
But has there been a credible forecast in JEDI and the economic impact of climate change? If so, what might the state include in its policy and incentive toolbox? I guess I would go to DEP or DEP staff.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of this. This is so broad. I'm trying to search for the right way to answer. So our statewide climate resilience strategy has, throughout every single chapter, explained a number of the equity considerations that we need to take into account as we move forward in preparing our resilience plans on a statewide basis, right? So one of the things that we know, for example, is that we're likely to see those extreme heat impacts increase in our urban core, right? Our urban heat island effect. So one of the things that we need to consider is how do we begin to try and adjust for that? For example, through expansions of our urban and community forestry program, that could be a deliverable in response to that one equity issue. But the equity issues are replete throughout. And they're happening now. We're seeing those increased temperatures in our urban core now. It's not as though we're waiting for it to happen. It's just going to get worse. And we should do our best to be as ahead of that as we can. And the same is true of flooding, right? What did we see in Lambertville? We saw entire first floor, though we saw renters who their entire lives were on these first floors. It wasn't just their basements getting flooded out, it was their whole lives getting washed away. That is an environmental injustice. And these are the types of issues that we need to form policy around. So if we're talking about elevations in expanded flood hazard areas, we've got to get people up off those first floors. It's not safe. And no one deserves to lose their entire life because we collectively have not prepared ourselves to manage the influx of chronic inundation. As the mayor was noting, that what we do in one community impacts another. Who's bearing the brunt of that? We've got to be really attentive to those outcomes.
Thank you. And then I think we're coming up against our time. So we do have one last question that I think is probably a good ending for us. What are some concrete things that municipality can do now to prepare for climate change?
Build green infrastructure everywhere you can, in all the ways you can, and push back against those developers who will tell you that it is too much for their bottom line. They are wrong.
And I guess on that note, I would ask, can the DEP be a partner in those conversations? Because developers have a little bit of a deeper pocket than some municipalities do. And when they push back, having the strength of the state support behind, I think, would go a long way.
We're here for you. If we can contribute to a conversation and help offer a sober assessment of something that you're struggling with from a stormwater management perspective, from a green infrastructure perspective, we are here to support you.
Thank you. Commissioner, thank you very. What? I'm sorry.
I was going to add on that topic of what local governments can do. One thing that might not be super obvious is to make it easier to build denser housing in areas that are naturally resilient, getting rid of single family zoning in places that are up on hills and are naturally not in the floodplain, and to increase the stock of housing and the available housing for people who have to be relocated from areas that are on those first floors.
Thank you. I think that will wrap us up. We will continue. If there's any questions, Mike, if we didn't get to any of the questions, maybe we can gather them and get them back over to the commissioner and Dr. Fairweather.
We have a record of what was asked. If we missed anything.
Great. So we can do that. We appreciate, Dr. Fairweather, we really appreciate your time, and we will definitely share the information. And obviously, Commissioner, as always, it is a pleasure to have you and to have a conversation with you. And I'm practicing for our wicked debut.
I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Everyone have a good day.